The Western Front, 1916. A place where the very earth seemed to scream in agony. Imagine a festering wound across the earth, a scar that refuses to heal. This is the trench system, a network of despair and survival, a labyrinth of mud, barbed wire and death, each step a gamble with fate. Soldiers huddled in these ditches, trapped in a living nightmare. They are surrounded by the constant threat of artillery and machine guns, every moment a test of endurance. The air is thick with the stench of cordite, sweat and decay, a suffocating miasma that clings to everything. This is a place where hope goes to die, where the human spirit is tested to its limits. The trenches were a nightmarish landscape, a vision of hell on earth. Imagine miles of trenches, zigzagging across the battlefields, a maze of misery and death. Rain transformed the trenches into rivers of mud, a quagmire that swallowed men whole. Soldiers waded through this muck, their feet rotting in their boots, a slow, agonizing decay. The trenches offered little protection from the elements, leaving men exposed to the harshest conditions. They were vulnerable to enemy fire, a constant threat that loomed over them every second of every day. Death was a constant companion in the trenches. The air itself was heavy with it. The smell of rotting flesh permeated everything. Soldiers lived, fought and died amongst the decaying bodies of their comrades. Rats, fattened on human remains, scurried through the trenches. Lice infested everything. Disease spread like wildfire. The soldiers lived in a perpetual state of fear. Every moment could be their last. A shell could explode at any second, burying them alive or tearing them to pieces. Snipers hid in the distance, waiting for a moment of carelessness. The constant threat of death weighed heavily on their minds. Life in the trenches was a monotonous routine punctuated by moments of sheer terror. Soldiers spent their days repairing damaged trenches. They stood guard, their eyes peeled for enemy movement. They wrote letters home, trying to maintain a semblance of normality. Boredom and anticipation gnawed at their souls. Food was scarce and often inedible. The men subsisted on meager rations of bully beef, biscuits and lukewarm tea. Sleep was a luxury. They snatched what little rest they could in cramped dugouts, the roar of battle never far away. Section 4. The unseen enemy, fear and despair. The physical challenges of trench warfare were nothing compared to the psychological toll it took. The constant threat of death, the deafening noise, the lack of sleep, the horrific sights, all of it chipped away at the soldiers' sanity. Many men broke under the strain, driven mad by the relentless horrors they witnessed. The soldiers faced a barrage of emotions. Fear was a constant companion, fear of the next attack, fear of a gruesome death, fear of letting their comrades down. Despair settled in as the war dragged on, seemingly without end. They questioned the purpose of it all, the futility of their sacrifice. Section 5. Shell shock. The wound within. The horrors of the trenches left many soldiers with deep psychological scars. They called it shell shock, a term that barely scratched the surface of the torment these men endured. Men returned from the front lines haunted by nightmares, their sleep disrupted by the echoes of artillery and the cries of fallen comrades. They struggled to cope with the memories of what they had seen and done. Conversations with fellow soldiers often turned into sessions of shared grief and trauma. Some became withdrawn and unable to function in civilian life. The isolation was a stark contrast to the camaraderie they had known in the trenches. Others were plagued by tremors, unable to escape the feeling of constant danger. The war had ended, but for them, the battle continued every single day. The medical community struggled to understand this new type of wound, a wound that left no visible marks but shattered the mind. Doctors were at a loss, often misdiagnosing or dismissing the symptoms. Treatments were often ineffective, leaving many veterans to grapple with their demons alone. Therapy sessions were rudimentary, and many soldiers felt abandoned by the very society they had fought to protect. The true cost of the war, the invisible wounds, would linger for decades to come. These psychological scars were a silent testament to the horrors of war, a reminder that not all wounds bleed. Section 6. Dear Home. Letters home offered a brief respite from the horrors of the trenches. Soldiers clung to the memories of their loved ones, finding solace in the thought of returning to a world untouched by war. They wrote of mundane details, everyday occurrences, desperately trying to bridge the gulf that separated them from their former lives. These letters were more than just updates, they were lifelines. They were a reminder of the world they were fighting for, the world they hoped to return to. They wrote of love, longing, and hope, clinging to these emotions as a shield against the despair that threatened to engulf them. Section 7. Scars that time cannot heal. The survivors of the trenches emerged from the war forever changed. They had faced unimaginable horrors and endured the unendurable. The war had taken a toll on their bodies and minds, leaving scars that would never fully heal. They had witnessed the depths of human cruelty, the fragility of life, and the sheer randomness of death. The trenches were a place where hope was a rare commodity, and survival was a daily struggle. The horrors that men inflict upon one another were etched into their memories. The screams of the wounded, the sight of fallen comrades, and the constant threat of death were their daily companions. They carried the weight of their experiences, both physical and emotional, long after the guns fell silent. The physical wounds were visible, but the emotional scars ran deeper, often hidden from view. The war left an indelible mark on an entire generation. Millions dead, millions more forever scarred. The loss was immeasurable and the grief was profound. The world they returned to was different, forever altered by the conflict. Cities lay in ruins and the social fabric had been torn apart. The war had changed everything. The trenches had tested their courage, their resilience, their very humanity. They had been pushed to their limits and beyond, and those experiences had left an indelible mark on their souls.